So when I was walking in to watch this week's episode of To the Abandoned Sacred Beast, I was actually a tad worried because I realized that after this week's episode, we'd only have a couple of left, and then I was unsure, would we get an ending this season? Would they go anime original with it? Would they leave us off on a cliffhanger, or would they potentially confirm a second season somewhere down the line? And that got me worried because I love this show so much and I didn't want to see it end on a poor note. But then walking out of episode 10, I realized that even if they were to leave us on the go read the manga ending, with what happened with Nancy and Hank's relationship in this episode and just the deal they made, their current oath that if Hank loses himself, Nancy will kill him and also will carry on the memories of his fallen soldiers, it almost feels like an open-ended nature that even though there's a bigger story at play than just what Hank's doing, we have the Kane story, we have this military story overall, it still feels as if we could leave here and feel satisfied and recommend this, which is a really great feeling because we still have 2 episodes left. We see after the credits that there is going to be some interrogation of Hank and seeing what's going on. We have other stories, of course, but the fact that the main thing that has hooked me week by week is this growing relationship between Nancy and Hank, and how satisfying it currently feels makes me so happy for the future of the series, whether that future just be 2 more episodes, another season, or if I someday check out the source material, it just feels like major payoff in everything that we've been building up to throughout these weeks. It just feels as if this oath that has been going on for so long, that you would kill your soldiers before they fully lost themselves, and if they did lose themselves, you would make sure that you were the one to pull the trigger and not some random soldier who would make sure they'd suffer or not really understand that they aren't some beast, they are a human deep down inside. And to see how much of a burden it's eventually become to Hank is pretty painful. This is a man who was so emotionless at face value in the early stages that someone like Nancy wanted to pull the trigger because you killed my father, you have no emotion, and to see where it's all ended up 10 weeks later, it's pretty heartbreaking, especially because he asks for death in that cave. He asks, please kill me, and then of course, yeah, you wouldn't want to kill me, forget I said anything. And he was willing to go to his death, sacrifice himself to kill Roy and just end it. Just let the pain stop, let the numbness go away. And the fact that Nancy came in such a heroic way was probably one of my favorite scenes I've seen this week. The idea of her sliding in and pulling the trigger to wound the leg, but not a fatal blow or anything, to make sure that Hank could deliver the finishing blow because she knows what Hank's goal is. And just to give that shoulder to lean on. All this time, even a couple weeks back, I said the reason Hank's gonna lose himself here is he doesn't have Nancy anymore. And the fact that she came to his aid and gave that deal, it shows not only how far she's grown mentally, the idea of understanding that someday she might actually have to put down Hank, and she's willing to do that for him, but also until that point, she looks at him no different than any other human around her. But then to see Hank's just smile in just relief that all he wanted was support, and it felt like he was going at it for so long by himself, and to have that support, he could finally fight in his beast form and not be afraid of who he was because he believed he would come back to being a human, and that soldier Roy used to fight with on the battlefield is once again there, but he's back to who he once was. And I just love that, especially because this episode starts off in such an emotionally gripping way, showing a very quick but very memorable snippet of the battlefield and why this guy with a lot of charisma, a guy who invoked pride, saw something so special in his captain, and how even though their beasts were quite similar at face value, their personalities were quite different and they both aided their cause. And to see by the end of the episode, that same soldier is back and willing to take the life that's all he ever wanted. He wanted his captain to be who he once fought with on the battlefield, because if he was, he would easily kill him. He would realize that he couldn't beat his captain, but in this current weak form, he couldn't. But they both went back to their human forms at the end of the day, and that's what's so gripping about this story, is that you look at how the show's functioning, and it really should just be a tag-along character, Nancy, who doesn't understand what's going on. Hank, the emotionless wanderer who kills all his soldiers, and we get some sort of a cheap and sappy backstory. And then we get a cool design week by week. But there's actually a character, there's actually a story at play. And these small deviations they take and just the human reactions and emotions overall is what elevates this to not look at just giant werewolves or mammoths and things like that. We look at them and say, yeah, they're a beast form. The way the character writing is actually being presented, it feels like human characters. And if you can look at a monster and say, this feels like a human character, you know they're doing something right. Because that's the entire point of this story, is even though you see these supernatural things, you're supposed to feel like it is a military war-driven story. where even though they do have these supernatural powers, they still are human at the end of the day. And they went through a lot of shit. You see some pretty graphic stuff in the intro, where literally his body's being ripped apart to make them into the beasts they are. And it gives you an even better idea of why, when they're currently being hunted by their former soldiers and just comrades and things like that, why they would be so pissed off, because not only are they fighting to keep control of their sanity, they have these natural urges that they just can't control. And when you realize what they went through to become who they are and how brutal and painful it was, to now be hunted by the people that you helped to win their war, it's obvious why it wouldn't be easy to hold on to your sanity and would just become a demonic beast. People like Hank didn't, because he had the support and he had the reason to fight, because he kept on that guilt and burden, because he needed to make sure his soldiers would survive. And by survive, I mean basically pass on as they once were, not who they would become, which would be just something from hell. But it eventually caught up to him, and to have that Nancy support, it just really ties together what the past 10 episodes have been. This pacing and the way they've been structuring this story, it's the slightest deviations, but it's enough to really make you feel like it's payoff. Like, this could honestly end here. If this was a 10 episode season, I'd probably walk out saying it's incredibly open-ended, we still have so much more to tell, but I'd be fine with this here. But of course, we still have more story to tell. We have that cliffhanger. We have basically after the credits here, and it looks like he's going to be interrogated, especially based on the preview, and there's going to be more stories. We still have Kane out there. There's still a lot to tell, but the payoff and the satisfaction of just seeing where both Hank and Nancy has went, and knowing that even if we don't get to see both of their personal stories concluded, you know, should Hank lose himself, the trigger will be pulled by someone who he loves and cares for. And if he doesn't lose himself, he would have that shoulder and support to lean on for the rest of his life. And that's what's super emotionally gripping about this, and I'm sure I'm not alone feeling that, because this was an exceptionally strong episode. Definitely my favorite of To the Abandoned Sacred Beast. It just feels like payoff, and a couple of weeks back, it also felt like payoff with Nancy's resolve and feeling like, oh my god, Nancy's got this moment where everything she's been saying all along, that maybe not all these characters have to be killed. And then you get this episode, and it's even better than what was seen with the Siren episode. It just really feels like To the Abandoned Sacred Beast, it had a plan. It had a path that it wanted to follow. It's just if you stuck with it, you saw these pieces snap together and build a really elegant tower that wasn't actually as cliche as a Monster of the Week series that you thought it might have been at the beginning of the show, when it actually formed into a really memorable military story overall. Like, I just love it when you see the pain in the beast. Like, there's plenty of shots that are static, or you just have these wider shots where maybe some details aren't as crisp and clean as you may like. But when it really goes brutal and just like you see beasts punching each other or clawing each other, it's actually pretty graphic overall. And even though they are an animal, so to speak, with what you're looking at, it does feel quite hard to look at times, especially when you see Hank literally pummel his fist through a chest into a tree, and then you get the dialogue just kind of wrapping up their story overall. It's pretty graphic and just, it's heartwarming because you do get that bonding sequence before they die, but it's also heartbreaking because why did this have to happen? It was all for a war, and then they get betrayed at the end when the war is all said and done, because they're worse than any war should they lose themselves, and it just becomes this really conflicting tale where each episode you might kind of flip on which side you want to fight for and kind of root for. And that's what makes the series overall just really interesting and hooks me week by week, and why I'm always so excited to get up here, both watch the episode but also review it. I definitely think Hank's emotional heartbreak and just the way he was delivering his lines was incredibly memorable. It really felt like a defeated man, which is so opposite to what we're typically used to. Either a very stone cold, almost emotionless voice, or someone who does invoke a lot of emotion, just ready to die, and just the pain and torment within not only his face reactions and overall body structure and language overall, but the emotion. It really did feel like someone in a recording booth getting into the mentality of, I have to make sure this feels like a man who has done so much, feels like he's trapped in eternal hell, and make sure the viewer understands that this is something that's supposed to invoke emotion. And I think they did an exceptional job. The voice acting, of course, with Nancy was great as well, but it was Hank, especially when asking for death, that really sold it for me. I really don't know how this series wants to end in a couple of episodes, but I do hope we get to see another season of this, because there's still so much left to tell. But should we have to end it here, I'm just so happy that I feel like I got the major payoff that I was looking for, which was the overall development between Nancy and Hank, which was just simply wonderful, simply phenomenal, and thank God we at least got this, should they leave us off on the go read the manga ending. Overall, I just thought this was a fantastic episode of To the Abandoned Sacred Beast, but what did everyone think, either for source material readers or anime originals like myself? Favorite moment, where do you think next week is going to go, and how did you like this episode? Let me know down in the comment section below. If you did enjoy this video though, be sure to drop a like and also hit that subscribe button if you have been new. So until next time everyone, please take care and have a good one.